Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam and
Alan,
hello Alan. How are you?
I'm not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, no, all good, all good. Just surviving as everybody else is. Yeah, and just I don't know. Work's been picking up a bit more for me now. I don't know about you, but it's I think it's a bit quieter this week because it's half term here in the UK, so everybody's sort of out and about really. But yeah, just things have just I don't know. It's hard to explain. I don't think things are getting back to normal. I just think I think more well everything's becoming this new normal. Does that make sense? I think the longer that
Yeah,
we go on with the pandemic, that we just get more used to it, don't we? And but anyway, but yeah, it's all good. How about you? What have you been up to?
yeah, just working, doing some low code, no code development,
How dare you?
using logic apps and things like that. So this topic is going to be quite interesting for me because I know about it, but never used it in
Yeah,
real.
yeah, no. Well, let's start off by introducing what we're actually going to talk about. So this week we are talking about ARM templates, which stand for Alan.
I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Yes, Azure Resource Manager templates.
Oh, of
So,
course, yeah.
yeah, we're going to talk about ARM templates, and we're going to talk about we're going. Sorry, I just put you on the spot there. I apologize. We're going to talk about ARM templates, why you should use them, what they're used for, and talk around some of the benefits of maybe how we would deploy infrastructure before, and how ARM templates and the whole ARM templates sort of sit under the infrastructure as a code sort of technology stack. So we're going to talk about infrastructure as code and give you just a brief. If that's something that you're not using at the moment or you've never been exposed to, we're just going to take you on a real high level tour of how we see that sort of ecosystem. Okay, so let's get started.
So, what is infrastructure as a code then, Sam?
Okay, so obviously we've got software that's written using code, right? So we get our lovely programmers to write software in a language of their choosing and in a technology stack of their choosing, and then the code that is written is then built into a software application, right? So we know because that code gets compiled into a piece of software, we know what is going to be built, right? We program the computer to do what we want it to do, and we know the output because we say, we write this code to do this function, we run it through the compiler, it turns it into an application, and then we kind of got a really good idea of what we're going to get out the other side of it, right? If you then take that sort of analogy and that process to infrastructure, let's talk about traditional infrastructure just quickly, actually. How you would provision traditional infrastructure and maybe even a bit of cloud, right? Because we can all jump into the portal, and if we want, say, a virtual machine, we can go into the Azure portal and we can click, I want a Ubuntu virtual machine, and I want it to be this size, and I want it to I want this fancy configuration inside of this network security group and X, Y, and Z. And we can go in and provision that ourselves, right? And we can, at the time that we can create it, we can do the configuration of that machine. Okay. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? Because at the end of the day, we're still using a technical professional's knowledge to configure that machine, and we know that it's been correctly configured, right? But how do we know that it's actually been correctly configured, right? How do we know that that person didn't, that they attached the extra SSD disk that our application needed as a cache? Like, how do we know that that's actually happened? And we can write robust documentation, we can verify what's happened, but that is a very manual process, right? Even though we're using the power of like a cloud platform and portal to do that configuration. So infrastructure as code, as the name suggests, is instead of clicking through the admin console and building these resources yourself, maybe what we could do is we could write some, and I'm using inverted, commas here, code. Obviously you can't see that because we're on a podcast. We could instead of manually going and doing that, we could describe our infrastructure as code, and then what that would mean is that we could verify and repeatably deploy infrastructure. So imagine that, let's say you had an application that needed, let's say it just needed an Ubuntu server. I'm just using that as an example because it's relatively simplistic. Say you needed one of those in North America, one in Europe, and one in APAC, Asia Pacific. You could go and manually create each one of those, or you could write one infrastructure code file and deploy it in each of those regions. And then you would know that at least the base configuration of the machine is the same across all regions. And this whole infrastructure as code is really just about that repeatability and being able to, define your infrastructure without having to manually go and build anything.
Yeah. So I guess you're kind of saying as well, when you do those virtual machine builds, as the example, it's not just the virtual machine you have to spin up, is it? It's networking, it's the
correct, and
all the other stuff that comes with it.
Yeah, exactly. So when and you're completely right, Alan, is when you create a virtual machine, like you might want a static IP address, right? Because that's quite a you want to know that the IP address isn't going to change. It's not inside of a dynamic pool, right? So you might want to attach a static IP address to that thing. You might be bringing your own IP address, or it might be the network security group, right? Where you're setting firewall rules. Well, not firewall rules. Let's just call it inbound rules on a network security group, right? Like you want to say, oh, I want to close the SSH port, and X, Y, and Z. It doesn't matter what the configuration is. But you're exactly right. It's not just the fact of, what CPU, RAM, hard drives, has this virtual machine got. It's all the other things around it. Do I need when I build my virtual machine, do I also need a web application firewall? And the configuration of that web application firewall. So yeah, when you start to have this sort of graph of dependent resources that all need to be built at the same time, that's not just one virtual machine in each region. You're then talking about 5 or 6 different things that you then maybe have to go and configure as well.
Yeah, I mean, virtual machine has loads of things, but things like key vaults and things like that, and other things don't necessarily need all of that. But yeah, you might need to default some of it.
Yeah, and I think it's worth just pointing out the example that I've used with making a basic virtual machine. There's very few actual use cases where you just need such a simple setup. Like the sort of applications that we're now building. There's many interconnected different services that we're using across the Azure, cloud stack. It's not, some more legacy applications. Yes, it's like fire up a machine and we'll look after it and we'll monitor it and all of those things. I mean, this is a conversation about IaaS versus PaaS versus SaaS, I suppose. But it's if you are having to run your own infrastructure and manage your own infrastructure, you want to take as many human variables out of that infrastructure as you possibly can, right? And that's exactly what infrastructure as code is doing for you.
Cool. Yeah, so I've heard of this as well from my side, with Sentinel, Azure Sentinel, in that you can build your rules and everything in there using infrastructure as code. They've recently released that.
Yeah, and I think it's just worth pointing out as well is that under the hood, this is what the Azure portal is doing. When you're clicking around in this in the interface, you're building like a JSON configuration file that they're then sending to the backend service to build the infrastructure, right? So once you've built something, we'll talk about this later, but once you've built something, you can go pretty much. Well, I'll say. So take this with a grain of salt, but pretty much every single thing you can build in Azure, if not everything. I want to say everything, but I don't want to I don't want to shoot myself in the foot. you can go onto there and you can see the actual configuration file, and see what Azure created when you rolled out that piece of infrastructure. So what I like to do is to, let's say I want to set up a network security group. Well, whatever it is. Let's say it's a network security group. I go and build everything that I want in the admin interface, and then I copy out the config that they've made for me, and then use it as part of my ARM template because it is
Brilliant.
exactly the same thing. So that's one way. And I mean, I've sort of stumbled. I've sort of moved ahead of what we were going to talk about, but you know, there's great resources out there to build ARM templates as well. But it's just good to it's just good to know that they're using this under the hood.
Yeah. Okay. So why should we use infrastructure as code rather than going through the portal?
Okay.
I mean, apart from we've kind of talked about a few things like repeatability and a bit like that, but what else is there?
Okay, so yeah, repeatability is the big one, right? Once you've got a known configuration, you can run that 100 times, and touch wood, the computer should, the computer, Azure should run the same. If you run it 100 times, it should do the same thing every single time. What we can also do is, because it's written as code, as like a text file, or say a JSON configuration file, you can version that. So you can say, I'm going to store that in a source code repository. So I could put that, say, on GitHub. And then when I make a change to it, I can see all the changes I made. I can put that into a review with other people. I can put it into a staging environment and see how it works. And I can build versions of it. So we can actually see it's not a binary item. When you make a change to it, you can't reconcile the changes that you've made. So you sort of have a documented history of the versions that you've been through with that infrastructure. So that's also really powerful in teams and getting people's opinions on infrastructure, which is really good. I think speed is another massive one. Computers can deploy ARM templates a lot faster than anybody can click through the portal. That is a challenge if anybody wants to ever try that. But there's once you've built, yes, there is some downtime with actually building the template, but once you've built that template, you can run it very fast, which is really good. And speed leaves me on to the last point about disaster recovery. So if in the event, and again, I'll touch wood, but if in the event that you had a catastrophic disaster scenario, let's say the whole of UK South was obliterated by, I don't know, a dinosaur extinction event level asteroid hitting it, right? Like, as in, if that, and you're still alive at this point, and you need to bring up your whole infrastructure in another region, an ARM template could help you, improve your disaster recovery response time. It's not gonna, because where are you gonna get your backups from? I'm not saying that it's, this be all and end all to your DR process, but it can really help, in that event that, let's say you want to spin up a staging infrastructure, before it might be like, oh, well, I would have to talk to IT to get that, to get that done before. And I don't mean that if anybody from IT is listening, I don't want to make that seem like IT is slow, but, when you could potentially spin up your own, all you've got to do is just, run that ARM template in a new resource group, and you've got your own little mini environment set up there. So yeah, it gives you an element of speed there and flexibility.
Okay, so does that? Oh, you've already got it into the next bit, so I won't talk about it just now. But well, what does that mean then for our? Does that mean that some of us are out of jobs because we don't have to click the buttons?
Well, I'm sorry, Alan. No, I don't mean that. No, I don't mean it like that. I think it's good to talk about. It's good. I think it's good to talk a bit about DevOps now as well. And if people don't, I don't think we've done an episode on DevOps. Maybe we should do an episode on DevOps, because I would say it's a hot topic. It's very, very popular. But the idea of DevOps is bringing developers and ops, like IT operations, more closely engaged with each other. And really, that's about DevOps is mainly about. Don't nobody shoot me, but it's mainly about speeding up your time to go live, right? So if you've got a new application package and you want to deploy it to production, having to wait for IT to roll out that software package, in a more traditional, large-scale corporate IT world, could take time, and that's something that maybe you have to go through many meetings to get done, and all of that sort of stuff. So DevOps has automated a lot of that pipeline, so that once the developers are happy, and they've signed it off, it can go live to production in a secure environment. So
So
yeah, so go on.
I
Yeah.
was going to say, so is that talking about continuous delivery in
Yeah, so
that?
continuous integration, continuous delivery, whatever acronyms and names you want to give to it. It's basically, I've made a code change. Everybody around me has agreed that this is ready to go live. I press a button and it's on production in 5 minutes instead of sending a package to IT and getting them to upload it, right? So the pipeline, as they call it, is already carved. Developers and IT define that pipeline together. Well, a DevOps engineer now, that's an actual role, like inside of organization, would define that pipeline, and they would thingy. So this kind of follows on from this, this, and I'm not saying that developers should be deploying infrastructure and they should be architecting this infrastructure. I'm not saying that at all. But if you take my example of a staging environment, a developer would be able to, inside of like their MSDN subscription, be able to fire up a test version for them to play with and to test on before having to get like IT involved. And then once the developer has worked out what all of the, when they're developing the solution, they could be designing the infrastructure, and they can use that on a template as a basis to go to IT with how they would like it to be hosted. Yeah. And IT, so IT aren't out of the job, because IT, well, IT, I suppose IT professionals are. We've talked about on-premise versus the cloud now. This whole cloud migration, IT is very different to how it used to be, right? There's a lot more software as a service in there than maybe there has ever been. But I don't think so. I don't think it's, this is putting people out of the job. I think this is because nobody wants infrastructure that's incorrectly configured, right? Because that causes everybody headaches. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and bringing up infrastructure is just one part of the IT, of a piece of software, the IT lifecycle of that software. Building the infrastructure is only one single part of that. So
and spinning up not hardware, but virtual appliances and things like that isn't, it's a job, but it's not really the the fun job per se. It's not looking at, well, for me it wouldn't be anyway, but you know configuring it afterwards, making sure it's secure. I mean, that's me coming from my side, but
yeah.
make sure the network's correct and things like that. That's interesting to people. Getting it to actually spin up the network, no one really per se cares, as long as it's there and it's at a in a standard form, and then it's ready to then add the extra rules in, etc.
Yeah. Well, if you think about this, though, is that yes, that bringing up of infrastructure might have been a manual job before, but that doesn't mean to say that an IT professional couldn't get on board and actually use ARM templates in production, right?
Mm.
And yeah, okay, yes, instead of going into the admin and working out, what network security rules are missing, and then just adding one manually, yeah. And maybe what they will do is they will add one manually and then go and update the template, as a part of their low-level design documentation, right? Because again, I suppose one big thing that I didn't talk about is infrastructure as a code, I should say, is there's like documentation there, right? Like anybody that understands, an ARM template can open that and see all of the different configuration and resources that are being deployed as part of that template. So yeah, and yeah, so yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, you just talking about that, making that change. The other thing as well is that if a change is made, you can always redeploy the template to overwrite the changes
Yeah,
as
exactly.
well.
Yeah, yeah,
So you've got change control there as well.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's full life cycle. And we can talk about different tools and things like that for the whole life cycle. But yes, you're completely right. It's not just about creating the infrastructure in the first instance. There is also change control in there. Okay, cool.
So what infrastructure code players are out there?
Okay, so obviously this is called the Azure Let's Talk Azure podcast. So we're going to talk about thingy, but other cloud providers do exist out there in the world, and they do have their own tools. And there's some really good cross-platform tools as well, which are
Okay.
worth talking about. So AWS has Cloud Formation. Obviously, that's kind of their version of ARM templates. There's Chef, Puppet. They've been around for years, and Chef and Puppet are really popular, and they're in the more Unix like arena, right? Like definitely, you know. So they've been around for ages, but I suppose the other big like elephant in the room here is Terraform, right? And HashiCorp, well, they make some insane tools, right? But Terraform, you may have heard of it, is infrastructure as a code, but platform agnostic.
Oh, okay.
So if you know Terraform and Terraform has a connector for your cloud platform, then you can write infrastructure as a code in Terraform language. It is still like JSON files and in
Yeah.
basic configuration. But if you follow the Terraform format, then it doesn't really matter what cloud platform you are. So one of the really, I suppose, one of the big things for me is it's one of these decisions that do you go with your cloud native solution? Like if you're a Microsoft, if you're a Microsoft partner and all you do is Microsoft, then should you go for ARM templates? Or should you learn as a professional? Should I learn Terraform? Because if I was to change my job and the next company that I went to work for happened to use Terraform, then that would be, that could be another skill set that I could bring to that organization. And the more there's also two things as well is Chef and Puppet, and Chef and Puppet are also about configuration, like making playbooks of what's actually configured on those servers. We'll talk about how you build images and everything like that. So I would say, and if anybody from Microsoft is listening, that's in the ARM, in the ARM product group, I would say that those tools are more feature rich in terms of large orchestration of many different systems. Okay, they've been around for a lot longer. There's a lot, there's been a lot more development in those systems.
So they're more about post configuration. Is that right?
Both. So
Right.
so
Okay.
so
So from the Microsoft world, then that will be desired state configuration. Then probably.
correct, and we'll also talk about image builder and things like that. So I'm not saying with Azure based products, and services, you can't get to the level of configuration that you need for your infrastructure as what Chef, Puppet, or Terraform could get you. But the only thing I'm saying is that if you learn Puppet, then you know Puppet, and it doesn't matter if your company uses Azure or AWS. So if I'm a DevOps if I'm an infrastructure and DevOps engineer, what am I going to learn? And when I earlier on when I used to use Azure, I used to use a lot of Terraform because I already knew it. So it kind of, and because like Terraform, like one of my products, we started building on DigitalOcean because of the price difference with Azure, right? So, and we needed like 600 virtual cores, and it just like made a lot more sense to be on DigitalOcean at that time. So what Terraform allowed us to do is be on DigitalOcean, and then when I wanted to go to Azure and I use low priority VMs, I could just change my Terraform connector and I could do the same thing again. So there is a massive benefit there, and I included this in the notes because I wanted to explain it, because it's not a one size all fits thing. When you're talking about infrastructure as code, I mean, you could just have a whole episode on just infrastructure as code, but it is worth knowing that these other products exist, and a lot of them are are open source and they are community maintained. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
guess there's no wrong way of doing it. It's just like you said, it depends if you're
no, and
all one cloud provider. You're an AWS engineer, you're an Azure engineer.
if your infrastructure uses any specific Azure technology, like let's say you use Web Application Firewall, right? That is an Azure product. Yeah, you can't deploy that to AWS or your own infrastructure,
Hmm.
right? Then you're already, let's say you use Cosmos DB for your backend data storage. You've already made the decision to go with that cloud provider. So, does it really matter that, your infrastructure is a code? You know, I think it's all to do with your company. Like if your company is going to be if you think you're going to migrate away from, let's say, your current cloud provider and go to someone else, if you think that your company is that agile, like as in, or wants to make that change, then it would make sense for you to use industry agnostic, tools
Yeah,
to allow you to move. But, you know, if you're doing work for a company that is Microsoft, and they are Office 365 and everything is Windows, then you're probably going to want to use Microsoft tooling for that because it's going to be the most integrated. It's the reason why I use Visual Studio, because it's most integrated. So yeah. So yeah.
yeah. So what's the pros then of using ARM templates, or some of them anyway?
Okay, so I think the biggest one is it's developed by Microsoft and fully integrated with Azure, right? It is the first party solution to infrastructure as a code, um,
And
directly from
you
Microsoft.
said, um, they use it. It's part of their build process anyway.
Completely right. So, if you want support, and this is the thing as well, is there's always a difference between what us technical professionals think we can do, and so we say, yeah, we'll build that in Terraform. That's cool. But then on a not a Friday afternoon, because we don't deploy on Friday afternoons anymore. On a Monday afternoon, right? On a Monday afternoon, you're trying to push out a thing. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Terraform. Please don't take this as this at all. But I'm just using them. I'm going to use them as an example. Okay. Terraform, open source project. Unless you've got support from HashiCorp, you just go, okay, I'll use Terraform because it's cloud agnostic. What happens when you can't get it working on that Monday afternoon? Right? And if you're the sort of large organization that's got like a fully dedicated Premier support with Microsoft and blah 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 blah, then you have legitimate access to the actual professionals that build this, because it's within their best interest for you to continue to use it. So I think that's also a really good point about, you have to think about your whole IT strategy and the partners that you've got and the support that you've got with your IT strategy, because that will really dictate what technologies that you can use. If you're a startup and you've got no money and you don't know which cloud you're going to end up on because you just had $10,000 worth of free Azure credits, right, given to you just randomly, or you've got, is it BizSpark? I think it's BizSpark or whatever. However, and you don't know what cloud provider you're going to end up on, then maybe ARM templates aren't the right thing for you. But if you're .NET and you're always, you're the IT professional and you're going to always be on Azure, then why not use ARM templates? Because there's great
Yeah.
documentation and it's thingy. So it's a really, it's not to say, yeah, it's not to say that it's not worth using. And I think also the tooling for ARM templates is great. I've included in the show notes here armviz.io. So what ArmViz does, I believe there's a Visual Studio Code extension as well for this,
Okay.
for ArmViz, and I think it's just exactly the same thing. But you can paste in your ARM template, and then you can visualize it, so you can actually see, and you see like a big sort of diagram of how everything connects to each other and everything like that. So you can actually sort of build and visualize your infrastructure. I don't think you can drag and drop on ArmViz. I don't think you can like select from a palette and then it will build it up for you. I think it's just a visualization tool of what your current thing is. So yeah, and I'm sure there are visualization tools for the other providers as well. It's just, this is what I use now day to day. So this is sort of my world now. And I think that's really it, because I think most of the pros of ARM templates come from the fact that their infrastructure is a code, not necessarily the fact that ARM templates are the best infrastructure as a code provider.
Okay, so let's talk about image builder.
Okay, so it's all well and good building your infrastructure, right, as code, but how do you build the configuration of the actual virtual machine image, right? And I'm talking specifically about virtual machines here, because they need, if you bring up a PaaS solution, like let's say you bring up app service, you can configure that with just configuration, right? But when you're talking about bringing up an actual virtual machine, you have to make sure that that virtual machine, when it's brought up, has got like the latest version of the packages that you need on it, right? And it's been configured so that it automatically patches itself, and that virtual machine has got your endpoint monitoring software on it already. Yeah. So what you can do, and this is currently in preview, is use Azure Image Builder. And if you use like Terraform, you'll know this is basically the identical to Packer. And what these do is it allows you to build Azure virtual machine images that are then used by your ARM templates. So you basically create a like a JSON template of all the steps that you're going to go through. So you're going to say like, right, okay, I want to build an image of like an Ubuntu machine. So what you're going to say is you're going to say like, okay, I'm going to base this image off of an A1 instance or an F1 instance or whatever it is. And then once it's booted up, I'm going to run these commands and install this software. So you might, like, if you were talking about Ubuntu, like the first thing you pretty much, like the hello world of Ubuntu is doing apt get update, apt get upgrade, apt get dist upgrade, right? Like that's, you want to bring that image like up to its, you just want to patch the base image, as soon as you're on there, right? Yep. And you don't want to have to do that for every single virtual machine you bring up, right? But also, once you've made that virtual machine image, it's kind of out of date. It's not out of date, but you're going to need to refresh it maybe you want to refresh it every month, right? Or every 2 weeks. Depends on what your IT process is. But, so you're saying, okay, the 1st of October, we make this image, and then we're going to say, okay, on the 1st of November, we're going to build another base image, and then we're going to replace our infrastructure with this new base image that's there, right? Well, once you've built the configuration for Azure Image Builder first, you can rerun it whenever you want. So this is like the actual configuration of the machine. And I think, and this is, it's very similar to Packer. I don't even know, it might even be the same actual underlying.
It does say it's built on the Packer.
Yeah, exactly. And Packer has, and Packer is built by HashiCorp, which is kind of part of the Terraform family. But Packer is open source. And Packer, so I have used Packer before with ARM templates, in the past to get my VHDs created. And then what can happen is once you've built your package, you can version it like with code, and you can say this is the October release of the software. And then it's available in your Azure like VM image gallery, or in Azure shared image gallery. So you can then say, if you're like the let's say you've got a piece of software that you deploy, and you're part of the team that handles the hosting infrastructure, it could be somebody's responsibility just to keep the image up to date, and making sure that the image is, so that when you want to bring up a new copy of the infrastructure, it doesn't take ages, and you're not, using a 6 months out of date image that needs to be patched. You're doing all of that work ahead of time, and also at that point, you can then do your QA to make sure that that new infrastructure works. So I think it's really important to know that as well. I don't really want to go through image builder too much, but basically it's that post infrastructure configuration, and making sure you're keeping your image library up to date.
Yeah, so I guess this is kind of, I mean, this is talking about Azure builds and things like that, but this is kind of the how you build your endpoint for your users, the image building for that to then put onto your laptops and everything, and the task sequences and configuration manager is how I kind of see this in my
Yeah,
world anyway.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's thing, and to also just talk about. I just want to just swing back a second because I have I have missed quite a big element as well of ARM templates. So whenever you see a button saying deploy to Azure, right, that is where people are talking about using ARM templates. So what you'll find is Microsoft will provide loads of quick start templates. So an example of this is Moodle. I don't know, Alan, have you heard of Moodle before?
I have a little bit, yeah.
So Moodle is a VLE, a virtual learning environment, which a lot of in the I think Moodle comes from Australia actually. I think that's where the company that originally built an open source Moodle, but it's an open source PHP virtual learning environment, and you can imagine Moodle itself is pretty big. It's been around for a long time, right? And it's got many revisions. It's got so many modules that you can plug into it, right? It's a pretty big beast. It's relatively, I'm gonna air quotes again, easy to host. It's not too much of a hog, but when you're talking about the first week of like everybody going back to university, you can imagine the sort of load that these virtual learning environments get. So setting up and Moodle is what's the best way to describe it? It's quite a simplistic web app, but there are a few things that you need to think about with Moodle because I'll give you an example. It uses like file-based caching, and if you've got two web servers, they have to use the same file system. So how does that work? Like when you've got two completely separate, or you've got a scale set, right? So the quick start got Microsoft actually, well, the Azure team actually provides some quick start templates for Moodle, and what that'll do is it'll bring up like an auto scaling web tier for you. It'll bring up Postgres for your database. It'll bring up Gluster, a Gluster your virtual disk so that you can share files between these servers. Azure Redis cache, Elasticsearch, and all sorts of other bits that you need. Create the subnets for you, and the load balancers that you need. So imagine specking out that architecture and then manually building that, right? And then let's say that your hosting requirements become even bigger and you need a third server, right? So you've got maybe two load balanced web tiers. Let's say you need a third because of load, right? How are you going to bring that online? How is your change control going to happen with that? And Microsoft give you these auto start templates, so quick start templates. So if you're ever thinking about hosting, let's say you've just been given an app that you need to host inside your organization, always have a look and see if you can find like Azure quick start templates for the app that you're thinking, because like for the Moodle one, they give you like different levels that you can build with. So you can say, right, they say like if you're a small organization, you should go with this. If you're an absolutely massive organization with like 6,000 active users, then you should use these. So that's the only other thing as well is Microsoft like want people to deploy those. Microsoft want consumption of Azure, right? So they're going to give you as much information as you can to bring those workloads to Azure.
And simplify it for you.
Oh, without a doubt, because if you're somebody in IT that has never seen Moodle before or care what it is or what it does, finding somebody to help you to spec out that infrastructure can be quite daunting. And maybe you've got a partner that would help you with that anyway. But it's also good to know how you could maybe do that yourself. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me. Unless have you got any other questions, Al?
No, I think you've covered everything.
Yeah, I mean, TLDR. Well, you did listen. You got to the end. Is that infrastructure as a code is a really positive thing, I think, for the whole industry. It's something that gives us versioning, repeatability, performance, scalability, and Microsoft have the tools for that. So I would encourage you to go out and learn whatever infrastructure as a code platform is right for you. ARM templates, I think, are a really good starting point. And then if you wanted to experiment with something like Terraform and take things a little bit more nuts, or multi-platform, if you're in a scenario where you've got cloud provider, Terraform's pretty much your only. Not only, there are others, but that's the big one that people sort of gravitate to.
Yep. Cool.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Have you got any news or anything for this week, Al?
No, I haven't got anything new. There's obviously been a load of stuff come out of Ignite, hasn't there? So there's not been anything new per se coming out. I've seen a few things, but I can't talk about it yet. So
in other news, my wife Annie, she did her challenge. I can't remember which one she did. She did the security challenge from Ignite, and yesterday she got her free exam through.
Nice.
So that actually happened, and she completed that challenge. It's interesting because when we were talking about, because she's going to do AZ900, and I know your reaction to that was like, AZ900, it's really boring, right? And when it's interesting because I think it was the challenge with security and identity. I think identity and
there was
security.
A couple, but yeah,
I can't remember which one she did exactly. But she was like, that was so much better than doing AZ900, and I was like, yeah, because you're actually learning real actual technologies.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, is this what Alan does? And I was like, yeah, you basically can just do Al's job now. and so yeah, we had a bit of a chuckle with that. So but it took ages because she did it, and Azure that thing ended a few weeks ago, but she finally got it yesterday. So if anybody else is waiting, then they should be coming through very immediately. So they should come through. But yeah, I don't really have any. Congratulations, obviously, to Annie for getting through her security challenge. She set herself a timeline to get her 900 done, and then hopefully on to. I think she's going to go on to 104. So yeah,
cool.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. That'd be awesome. So yeah, that's the only bit of news I've really got. I don't really have anything. I don't really have anything else. There, like you said, when there's a massive update, it's just like, yeah, we did a whole episode on news. So I apologise to anybody that wanted some actual tangible knowledge from our brains from that. It was just a regurgitation session, but it's but yeah, I haven't really got anything on my side.
No.
Cool. Okay, let's wrap it up there then. Thanks ever so much, Alan, for your time and for chatting with us. Obviously, I know it was sort of me talking about ARM templates, but I hope you've also learned something as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go and there's probably this week I'll probably start looking at it for the stuff I'm doing.
Well, you're on your own now, so
yeah.
Anyway,
but yeah, thanks for listeners. You're still listening.
Yeah, we can see you. We appreciate you. Definitely. So thank you.
We're a little bit delayed, weren't we? This one,
I had a slight illness. Not what everybody might think it is. But I don't know how I caught myself a cold when I was supposed to be keeping myself away from COVID. But anyway, but yeah. So we were supposed to record. I think it was last week, about a week ago, wasn't it? And I couldn't really talk properly, so I just didn't think it would be a very nice episode for anybody. What's happening in our next topic? Let's just have a quick old look at this one. Oh my word! Office Online is fail. Microsoft, give me what I need. Oh. There it is. Okay, so ARM templates. Okay, we're going to talk about virtual machines next time. So, what virtual machines are, why we use them, etc., etc. Kind of like our ARM templates chat as well. So, yeah, that should be coming very soon.
Okay, cool.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for listening, and thanks, Al, and I'll speak to you all later.
Yeah. Cheers, Sam. See you, everyone. Bye.